It took me 72 years to learn that a home is not a possession, but a promise. And it was a single phone call just 2 weeks after burying my wife that forced me to finally understand who that promise was made to. It was not made to the children we raised within its walls, but to the person I had shared my life with, and now to the man she had left behind. Before that phone call, I was just a grieving husband. After I became a man with a fight on his hands, a fight I never saw coming. The silence in our house had become a physical thing. For 50 years, this home on Sparrow Hill had been filled with the sounds of life. The laughter of our children, Andre and Simone, bouncing off the walls. The quiet hum of my wife Eleanor's sewing machine in the evenings. The familiar creak of the floorboards as she moved through the kitchen. Now all those sounds were gone, replaced by a deep, hollow quiet that echoed my own emptiness. 2 weeks. It had only been 2 weeks since the funeral, but it felt like a lifetime. The flowers had started to wilt, their sweet scent turning faintly sour, a sad reminder of how quickly life moves on even when you are standing perfectly still. I was in the kitchen staring at a mug of coffee I had no intention of drinking. It was a dark green ceramic mug chipped at the handle, a Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Maya years ago. It used to feel warm and familiar in my hands. Now it felt heavy, foreign, like it belonged to a man I no longer was. Everything felt foreign. My reflection in the dark window, the taste of water, the very air I breathed. I looked out at the garden, at the rosemary bush Eleanor and I had planted together a quarter of a century ago. It was overgrown now, leaning against the glass, as if it missed her too. The ringing of the telephone was a violent intrusion. It shattered the silence and made my heart jump in my chest. For a moment I considered not answering. Most calls were just well-meaning neighbors with condolences that felt like picking at a wound. But the ringing was relentless, insistent. With a heavy sigh, I picked it up. "Hello," my voice sounded rusty, unused. "Dad, it's Andre." My son's voice was crisp, efficient, completely devoid of the warmth you'd expect from a son calling his recently widowed father. There was no "how are you holding up?" or just calling to check in. There was only business. "Good morning, Andre." I said my words flat. "We need to talk about the house," he said, skipping any pretense of courtesy. His voice carried that restrained impatience I knew so well, the tone of a man whose time was far more valuable than yours. "This place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep. It's just not realistic. Simone and I have been talking. We've already found a buyer." I stared out the window, my knuckles white as I gripped the counter. A buyer. They had found a buyer for my home, for Eleanor's garden, for the 50 years of memories we had built. They had done this without asking, assuming my grief had rendered me incapable or perhaps simply not caring either way. They saw a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. They didn't see a home. They saw a house. "There is no mortgage, Andre," I said. The words came out quiet, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silence that followed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then a short, sharp laugh, the same one he always used when he felt superior. "Dad, please. We all know Mom's pension was small. We know you're under financial strain. There's no need to be proud." "I am not being proud," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of the strength I thought I had lost forever. "I am telling you a fact. Your mother and I paid it off 6 years ago. We just never told you." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't impatient. It was the sound of gears turning, of calculations being reconfigured. The sound of a son realizing his father was not the helpless old man he had imagined. In that moment, watching the morning light hit Eleanor's rosemary bush, I felt the first flicker of something other than grief. It was anger, and it felt like waking up. The line went dead, but the echo of my son's disbelief hung in the air. I placed the phone back in its cradle, my hand trembling slightly. The flicker of anger I had felt was now being smothered by a deep, familiar sorrow. It was one thing to be underestimated, but it was another to be so completely misunderstood by your own child. To Andre, my life was just a set of practical problems, a balance sheet of income versus expenses. He had never once considered the currency of memory, the value of a home built not just with wood and nails, but with shared dreams and quiet moments. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes, trying to find the peaceful center that Eleanor had always helped me locate. But before I could take a single calming breath, the phone rang again, its shrill cry even more jarring than before. My first instinct was that it was Andre calling back with a new line of attack. I almost let it ring. But then I glanced at the small screen and saw my daughter's name. Simone. With a sense of dread, I picked it up. Daddy. Her voice was the complete opposite of Andre's. Where his was sharp and brittle, hers was soft and syrupy, dripping with a manufactured concern that set my teeth on edge. Oh, thank goodness you answered. I've been calling and calling. I was so worried. I was just on the phone with your brother, I said, my tone carefully neutral. I had learned long ago that with Simone you revealed nothing. Every piece of information was a tool she could use. Oh, I know, she sighed, a little puff of dramatic air. He told me. That's why I'm calling. Daddy, I just can't bear the thought of you rattling around in that big old house all by yourself. It's too much for one person. My heart just breaks thinking about it. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. It was a performance I had seen many times. Simone's strategy was never direct confrontation. She was a weaver of narratives, and her favorite story was the one where she was the deeply caring daughter, burdened with the worry of her aging, fragile father. You know how proud Mom was, she continued, her voice taking on a hushed, reverent tone. She never wanted to be a burden on anyone, and her pension, well, we all know it barely covered her medications toward the end. She was so brave, but I know she must have been worried sick about you, about how you'd manage after she was gone. Every word was carefully chosen, a gentle but insistent pressure on a bruise. She was reminding me of my perceived weakness, painting a picture of me as a helpless widower, financially and emotionally adrift. She was telling me in the kindest possible way that I was incapable, that my 50 years of providing for my family, of building this life, meant nothing now that Eleanor was gone. Andre and I, we just want what's best for you, she said, her voice bright with feigned generosity. Selling the house isn't about us, it's about you. It would give you a nice nest egg, a real sense of security. You could move into one of those lovely retirement communities, have people your own age around you. No more worrying about leaky roofs or mowing the lawn. It would be a new beginning. A new beginning. She made it sound like a gift. But I knew it was a cage, a neatly packaged life where I would be out of sight and out of mind, my independence traded for their convenience. I listened to her spin her sweet poison into my ear, and I felt the walls of my own home begin to close in. Andre was the hammer, direct and brutal. Simone was the slow, creeping vine, choking you so softly you barely noticed until you couldn't breathe. I have to go, Simone, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Of course, Daddy. You rest. Just think about what I said, okay? We love you. I hung up the phone without another word. The silence rushed back in, but now it felt different. It was no longer empty. It was heavy, suffocating. I was a king in a castle, and my own children were at the gates laying siege. I stood there in the suffocating silence of my kitchen, the ghost of my daughter's sweet voice still clinging to the air. My home, my sanctuary, now felt like a courtroom, where I had been put on trial without my knowledge. They had already passed judgment. Andre, the aggressive prosecutor, and Simone, the sympathetic jury, both leading to the same verdict. Guilty of being old, guilty of being alone. My sentence was to be exiled from my own life. I pushed myself away from the counter and walked to the sliding glass door that opened onto the back patio. My gaze fell upon the garden and specifically upon the wild, sprawling rosemary bush pressed against the glass. And just like that, the cold, sterile present dissolved, and I was falling back through time. The hum of the refrigerator faded, replaced by the sound of birdsong and a woman's warm laughter. It was 25 years ago. We were younger, our bodies not yet betraying us with aches and pains we couldn't name. We had just bought the house on Sparrow Hill, a modest structure with good bones, but a yard that was nothing more than a patch of stubborn, rocky clay. I remember standing where I stood now, looking out at that barren expanse and feeling a sense of defeat. All I saw was hard work, an impossible task. But Eleanor, she saw something else entirely. She had come to stand beside me, slipping her hand into mine. I remember the feel of her calloused fingers from her work as a seamstress, a comforting and familiar texture. "It's just a patch of dirt and rocks, Eleanor," I had said, my voice heavy with doubt. "What can we possibly do with this?" She squeezed my hand and looked at me with that smile of hers, the one that always made me feel like anything was possible. "We can do what we always do, Charles," she said. "We can build something." And so we did. That first weekend, we began the Great War against the rocks. We spent hours under the hot sun digging and prying stones from the unyielding earth. I would loosen a large one with the shovel, and she would be right there to help me haul it to the growing pile at the edge of the property. My back screamed in protest, and sweat dripped into my eyes, but Eleanor worked with a tireless joy that was infectious. She would bring me tall glasses of lemonade, her face smudged with dirt, and we would sit on the back steps, two weary soldiers planning our next campaign. Slowly, impossibly, the barren patch began to transform. We brought in bags of rich, dark soil, spreading it like a blanket over the tamed clay. That was the day we planted the rosemary. I had dug the hole, and Eleanor had gently lowered the small plant into the earth, tucking the soil around its roots as if it were a sleeping child. "Rosemary is for remembrance, you know," she said, looking up at me. "What do we need to remember?" I asked, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. "We're right here." She smiled that secret smile again. "We need to remember this. This feeling. The beginning of things. I didn't fully understand then, but I do now. I was a carpenter by trade, so building the fence was my domain. I spent a week measuring, cutting, and sanding the wood for the pickets. Every morning Eleanor would be out there with me, a cup of coffee in her hand, ready to work. She wasn't a spectator in our life. She was my partner in everything. She painted each picket a brilliant, hopeful white, her movements precise and careful. We set the posts together, and as I hammered the final nail, we stood back hand in hand looking at what we had made. A small, perfect white fence enclosing a garden that was no longer just dirt, but a place of promise. That garden became the heart of our home. It was where we drank our morning coffee and watched the sun rise. It was where we taught our granddaughter Maya to tell the difference between mint and basil by their scent. It was where we hosted summer barbecues, the air filled with the smell of grilled chicken and the sound of our children's laughter back when their laughter still sounded genuine. In our later years, it was where we sat in comfortable silence, watching the seasons change, needing no words to understand each other completely. The garden grew with us, its roots intertwining with our own, becoming a living record of our shared life. I blinked, and the vibrant memory faded. I was back in my silent kitchen, a 72-year-old man. Through the glass, I saw the same rosemary bush now, a giant woody behemoth, its fragrant leaves still a testament to that long-ago afternoon. Eleanor was right. She had planted it for remembrance. And as I stood there looking at the life we had built with our own 4 hands, I remembered. I remembered who I was and what this place truly meant. It wasn't an asset to be liquidated. It was the promise. And I would not let them break it. The memory of the garden left an ache in my chest, a bittersweet mix of love and loss. But it also stoked a fire that I thought had long gone out. It was the fire of purpose, My children saw this house as a collection of rooms, a piece of property with a market value. But Eleanor and we had built it with our very lives. That thought led me from the kitchen window to the living room where I sank into the worn armchair by the fireplace. It was her chair, really. The fabric still held the faint scent of the lavender sachets she used to tuck into the cushions. Sitting there, I let another memory find me, one that was even more important than the first. It was the memory of the promise. The scene came back to me as clear as if it were yesterday. It was a cold Tuesday evening about 8 years ago. The rain was drumming a soft rhythm against the roof, and a warm fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I was in my own armchair reading a book, feeling the deep contentment that comes from a simple, shared life. Eleanor was at her small mahogany desk in the corner, the one she used for her sewing patterns and correspondence. But that night, she wasn't sketching a design or writing a letter. She was bent over a large book, a pen moving methodically across its pages. The only sounds were the rain, the fire, and the gentle scratch of her pen on paper. After a long while, she closed the book with a soft thud. "Charles," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "come look at this with me." I put my book down and walked over to her desk. In front of her was a simple ledger bound in dark brown leather, soft and worn at the edges. It looked unassuming, like something you might use to keep track of household expenses. But when she opened it, I saw that it was so much more. Page after page was filled with her elegant, precise handwriting. It was a meticulous record of our entire financial life going back decades. Every overtime hour I had worked at the carpentry shop, every dollar she had earned from a wedding dress alteration, every small, unexpected windfall. It was all there. But it was more than just a record of income. It was a history of our discipline. She showed me how she had taken small amounts, $20 here, $50 there, and invested them in modest, safe stocks. I saw the dividends, small at first, then slowly, steadily growing over the years. My eyes scanned the columns and numbers, a testament to a quiet diligence I had always known she possessed, but had never seen laid out so clearly. Then my finger stopped on one particular entry. It was the date of our final mortgage payment 6 years prior. The entry simply said, "Paid in full." It was underlined twice. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a profound sense of awe and love. "Eleanor, this is incredible," I managed to say. "We should have had a party. We should have opened a bottle of champagne. We should have told the children. They would be so proud of you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing affection, but also with a hint of sadness that I didn't understand at first. "They would be relieved, Charles," she said softly. "And then they would be expectant." I started to object, but she raised a hand. "I love our children more than life itself, you know that. But I also see them clearly. I see Andre and his constant need for the next bigger thing. I see Simone and her belief that she deserves a life she is not willing to work for. Their struggles are not born of true hardship, but of endless wanting. Their dreams have price tags, Charles, and they have grown used to others paying the bill." She gently placed her hand over mine on top of the open ledger. The worn leather felt warm beneath her touch. "This," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but with an intensity that commanded all of my attention. "This is our security, Charles, not theirs. This is for our own old age. It is for our dignity. This book ensures that we will never have to ask them for a thing. It ensures that we will never be a burden, and more importantly, that we will never be made to feel like one." In that moment, I understood completely. It wasn't about hiding wealth from our children. It was about protecting our peace. It was about preserving our right to live out our final years on our own terms, not as dependents in the lives of our busy, ambitious children. It was an act of foresight, an act of profound love for the life we had built together, and for the dignity of the person who would one day be left behind. I had simply never imagined it would be me. I remember nodding slowly, a silent vow passing between us, "You are a wise woman, Eleanor Dubois," I had told her. The memory dissolved, leaving me alone in her chair in the quiet living room. The rain was gone, replaced by the silence of the present. But now I felt her wisdom like a shield around me. This was the promise I had made to her. A promise to protect what we had built, not just the bricks and mortar, but the independence and dignity it represented. My son's impatience and my daughter's sweet poison were not just an attack on me, they were an attack on Eleanor's legacy, and I would not let it stand. Sitting there in Eleanor's chair, I felt the profound weight of the promise we had made to each other. It was a promise born not of cynicism, but of clarity. A clarity that had been painful to acquire, earned over years of watching the children we adored drift away from us on a tide of their own ambitions. It did not happen all at once. There was no single dramatic event, no slammed door or angry argument. It was a slow, quiet erosion. A divide that grew so gradually we almost didn't notice it until it had become a vast, unbridgeable chasm. My mind, unbidden, began to sift through the memories, the small, quiet moments that, when strung together, told the whole sad story. I remembered an afternoon about 5 years ago. Eleanor and I were at the kitchen table going over our monthly bills. The phone rang, and it was Andre. His voice was electric, with an energy he usually reserved for his work. He spoke quickly, a torrent of words about a can't-miss investment opportunity, a plot of land that was about to be rezoned. He used words like leverage and liquidity and projected returns. He never once asked how we were. He never asked about his mother's arthritis or the new bird feeder I had just hung in the garden. The call had a single undisguised purpose. He needed $10,000, and he needed it by the end of the week. I remember looking over at Eleanor as she listened on the speakerphone. She didn't look angry or surprised. She simply looked weary, as if she were listening to a story she had already heard 1,000 times. While he talked, she took a pen, and on the corner of a napkin, she drew a small, perfect dollar sign. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she drew a circle around it, and a firm line right through the middle. A silent, eloquent summary of the entire conversation. We gave him the money, of course. He was our son. He promised to pay it back within 6 months. We never saw a dime of it again. The memories shifted. Now it was a few years later at our granddaughter Maya's high school graduation party in our own backyard. Simone was the center of attention, as she often was passing her sleek new phone around. She was showing off photos from their recent family vacation to the Caribbean. I remember the images flashing by. Glossy, perfect pictures of turquoise water and white sand beaches. Photos of Simone and her husband raising cocktail glasses at a fancy restaurant, their children smiling in front of a waterfall. It looked like paradise. I remember asking the question that had been hanging in the air. "It looks wonderful, honey." When was this? Simone's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing, Dad," she said, her voice a little too bright. "A deal came up that was too good to pass on. You know how it is." But we didn't know how it was. The unspoken truth was that we were never considered. We were not part of the life she was so proud to display. I saw the flicker of pain in Eleanor's eyes before she masked it with a smile. She stood up and announced it was time to cut the cake, her grace a gentle shield against the casual cruelty of her daughter's omission. The scenes began to blur together after that, a montage of quiet disappointments. Our 45th wedding anniversary arrived. We received a text message from Simone with a single rose emoji. Andre called while driving, his voice distracted, promising to take us out to dinner sometime soon. That sometime never came. I remember Eleanor and I sitting at a nice restaurant downtown at a table set for 4. We had invited them and their families to celebrate with us. But an hour before, the excuses had trickled in. The kids were sick. A work emergency. We ate our meal in a quiet, shared sadness, the 2 empty chairs across from us, a testament to the space that had grown between us. It was in those quiet moments that we came to understand. Our children loved us in their own way, but their love had become conditional, transactional. We were a safety net to be used in emergencies, a source of funds for their ambitions, convenient babysitters for their children. We were a part of their past, a foundation they had built their lives upon, but we were no longer a part of their present. Eleanor and I never had a formal conversation about it. We didn't need to. We saw the truth in each other's eyes after every rushed phone call, after every forgotten birthday. The secret ledger was not an act of distrust. It was an act of acceptance. It was a quiet acknowledgement that we had to be our own sanctuary, because the one we had spent our lives building for our children was not designed to shelter us. And as I sat there in the encroaching twilight, the full weight of that realization settled upon me. I was the sole keeper of that promise now. This house, this garden, this quiet, dignified life. It was the last stand of the promise I had made to Eleanor, and I would honor it. The days that followed the phone calls were heavy with a silence that felt different from the quiet voice of grief. It was the silence of a cold war, a tense and watchful quiet, where I felt like a stranger in my own home. I moved through the familiar rooms, the ghosts of the past, mingling with the anxieties of the present. Every ring of the phone made me flinch. Every car that slowed on the street outside sent a jolt of apprehension through me. I felt besieged, and the memories of Eleanor, while a comfort, also served as a painful reminder of what I was fighting for and what I was fighting against. My children, my own flesh and blood, had become the enemy at the gates. I was resolved to honor my promise to Eleanor, but I felt utterly and completely alone in the fight. Then, on a gray Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Not the shrill cry of the telephone, but the gentle two-note chime that Eleanor had loved. My first thought was that it was Andre coming in person to press his case, or worse, a real estate agent he had sent to appraise the property without my permission. I walked to the door slowly, my heart a heavy stone in my chest, preparing myself for another battle. I took a deep breath, turned the lock, and pulled the door open. But it wasn't Andre. It wasn't a stranger. It was Maya. My granddaughter stood on the porch, a reusable grocery bag in her hands. Her expression a mixture of shyness and concern. She had Eleanor's eyes. I had always known that. But in that moment, in the flat gray light of the afternoon, it was so striking, it almost took my breath away. They were kind eyes, old soul ace eyes, and right now they were looking at me with a genuine warmth that I hadn't realized how much I was starving for. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. She held up the bag. "I made too much lentil soup, and I remembered you said it was your favorite." I stood there for a moment, unable to speak. Lentil soup. It was such a small, simple thing. But in that moment, it felt like the grandest gesture in the world. After days of feeling like a financial problem to be solved, here was someone treating me like a person, a grandfather, who might be hungry, who might appreciate a bowl of soup. I stepped aside and held the door open, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. She came into the kitchen and moved with a quiet, easy familiarity, as if she belonged there. She didn't fill the space with awkward questions about how I was really doing. She didn't offer empty platitudes about my wife being in a better place. She simply put the soup in a pot on the stove to warm her movements, calm and purposeful. She found the bowls in the cupboard and the spoons in the drawer. While the soup heated, she told me about her art history class, about a funny professor who wore mismatched socks, about a stray cat she had been feeding on campus. Her chatter was a gentle rain on the dry, cracked landscape of my solitude, and I found myself talking back. Not about the phone calls, not about the house, not about the suffocating pressure from my children. I told her about the rosemary bush outside the window. I told her the story of how her grandmother and I had planted it, a memory still so fresh in my mind. I found myself telling her about Eleanor's secret ledger, not the financial details, but what it represented, the promise we had made to each other to protect our dignity. Maya didn't interrupt. She just listened, her chin resting in her hand, those wise old eyes fixed on my face. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, her voice barely a whisper, "Grandma loved this house so much. I can still feel her here. Can't you?" And with those words, the dam inside me broke. Not with a flood of tears, but with a wave of profound relief. She saw it. She understood. This wasn't about money or real estate. It was about love and memory and a life that was still being lived. I realized then that she was not a messenger from her father's camp. She was her own person. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. We ate the soup in a comfortable silence at the kitchen table. It was rich and warm and tasted of home. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I didn't feel like I was adrift in a vast, lonely ocean. Maya's presence was an anchor. It had not solved my problems, but it had changed everything. I was no longer fighting a war on my own. I had an ally. And that small, simple fact felt like the first ray of sun after a very long storm. Maya's visits became a regular feature of my week. She would stop by after her classes, sometimes with soup, sometimes with nothing more than a story to share. Her presence was a gentle light in the gloom that had settled over the house. With her, I could speak of Eleanor without my voice breaking. We could share memories not as a eulogy for a life that was over, but as a celebration of a life that had been so richly lived. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that we decided together to tackle the one room I had been avoiding. Eleanor's sewing room. It was more than just a place where she worked. It was her sanctuary. The room was just as she had left it, filled with bolts of colorful fabric, spools of thread arranged like a rainbow on the wall, and books stacked on every available surface. It smelled of her, a faint comforting scent of lavender and old paper. The task of sorting through her belongings felt monumental, an emotional weight I had been unwilling to bear alone. But with Maya by my side, it felt possible. It felt like an act of love. We worked in a comfortable, companionable silence. I sorted through her old patterns, my fingers tracing the lines she had drawn, while Maya began the delicate task of dusting the tall bookshelf that dominated one wall. It was filled with her favorite things, worn volumes of poetry, antique gardening manuals, and novels with cracked spines that had been read and reread a dozen times. Maya was on a small wooden stepladder, carefully wiping the top shelf. As she reached for a thick, leather-bound copy of a poetry book, her hand slipped. The heavy volume tumbled from her grasp, falling through the air, before landing on the hardwood floor with a loud, definitive thud. The sound made us both jump. But it was the sound that came next that made us freeze. A small, sharp clatter as something metallic skittered out from between the pages and slid under the edge of an old rug. "Oops," Maya said, climbing down. "Sorry, Grandpa. I hope I didn't damage it." "It's all right, honey. That book has survived worse," I said, though my eyes were on the floor. She knelt down and lifted the edge of the rug. There, glinting in the soft afternoon light, was a small, ornate brass key. It was old-fashioned with an intricate, almost floral design for a head. She picked it up and held it out to me in the palm of her hand. The moment I saw it, a jolt went through me, a shock of recognition so powerful it felt like a ghost had walked through the room. My hand trembled as I took it from her. The metal was cool and smooth against my skin. "I don't believe it," I whispered. "What is it?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "This key," I said, turning it over and over. "Your grandmother wore this key on a gold chain around her neck. Every single day for all the 50 years we were married. I never saw her take it off." "What did it open?" A sad smile touched my lips. "I never knew. I asked her once, a long time ago. She just smiled and said it was the key to her heart. I thought she was being romantic. I assumed it was a keepsake, something from her mother, a piece of her past. I never imagined it was for a lock. But it was. It was a real key. A puzzle Eleanor had left behind. A new energy filled the room, replacing the quiet melancholy with a sense of purpose and mystery. We had to know what it opened. We started with the obvious places. The old cedar chest at the foot of her bed, filled with quilts she had made. The key didn't fit. Her antique jewelry box on the dresser. The lock was too small. We went through every drawer in her desk, searching for a hidden compartment, a small cash box, anything. Nothing. The key, which had seemed so full of promise just moments before, was becoming a source of frustration. I was ready to give up, to put the key in a drawer and accept that it was a mystery I would never solve. But Maya, with the boundless optimism of youth, was not. She stood in the middle of the room, her gaze sweeping over every detail. Her eyes, so much like Eleanor's, were seeing things I had long stopped noticing. "Grandpa," she said slowly, "that painting, has it always been crooked?" I followed her gaze to a large landscape painting on the wall. It depicted a sunny coastline with whitewashed houses and blue water, a scene from the Algarve in Portugal. It was a place Eleanor and I had always dreamed of visiting. And Maya was right. It was hanging just slightly askew. She walked over to it and reached up to straighten it. As her fingers touched the edge of the heavy wooden frame, she paused. "That's weird," she said. "It feels hollow behind it." She pushed gently on the wall beside the frame. At first, nothing happened. Then we heard a faint click. A perfectly square section of the wallpapered wall, no bigger than a dinner plate, swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark gray metal door. And in the center of that door was a small brass keyhole. It was a safe hidden in a wall I had built with my own hands, a safe I never knew existed. We looked at each other, our hearts pounding in a shared rhythm of disbelief and anticipation. I walked over to the wall, my legs feeling unsteady. I held up the small ornate key. It was a perfect match. With a hand that was not quite steady, I inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I took a deep breath and I turned it. The sound of the tumblers falling into place was loud in the quiet room, a final satisfying click as the lock of Eleanor's last secret disengaged. The door to the safe swung open with a quiet, well-oiled sigh, revealing a small, dark cavity within the wall. It was not filled with jewels or stacks of cash as one might see in a movie. Instead, there was only a single object sitting in the center. It was a handsome wooden box about the size of a shoebox, crafted from a deep, reddish mahogany that I recognized as the same wood I had used to build our first dining table. It was simple, elegant, and so quintessentially Eleanor. My hands shook as I reached in and lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked, solid and substantial, a container of secrets. Maya and I carried it into the living room, as if it were a sacred artifact. We sat on the floor in front of the cold fireplace and placed the box between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. This felt like the final chapter of a book we had been reading our whole lives, and we were about to turn the last page. I looked at Maya, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. Her presence was my courage. I lifted the unlatched lid. The inside was lined with a soft, faded blue velvet, and the scent of cedar and old paper wafted up to meet us. The contents were arranged in neat, orderly stacks, a reflection of the woman who had packed them. On the very top lay a thick bundle of official-looking documents tied together with a simple white ribbon. I untied the ribbon and unfolded the papers. My breath caught in my throat. It was the deed to our house, along with every official document from the bank, all stamped with the glorious, beautiful words, "Paid in full." Here was the undeniable physical proof of the truth I had spoken to Andre, the truth he had refused to believe. It was the foundation of our independence right here in my hands. Beneath the deed was another stack of papers. These were bank statements, stock certificates, and brokerage reports, all neatly organized by year. I had always known Eleanor was a careful saver, but what I saw laid out before me went far beyond simple thrift. It was the work of a brilliant, patient strategist. The small, consistent investments she had made had grown into a portfolio of staggering size. The numbers on the pages blurred before my eyes. It wasn't just a comfortable retirement fund. It was a small fortune. A lifetime of quiet, disciplined saving hidden in plain sight. This was the answer to Simone's sweet, poisonous words about my financial strain. It was a silent, powerful rebuttal to their narrative of me as a helpless, impoverished old man. They had never known. We had never let them know. I thought that was the end of the surprises. I thought I had uncovered the full extent of Eleanor's secret. I was wrong. Tucked at the very bottom of the box in a waterproof oilcloth pouch was one last set of documents. The paper felt different, heavier, and the language was not English. It was Portuguese. As I unfolded it, I saw architectural drawings of a small whitewashed villa with a blue tile roof nestled on a cliff overlooking the sea. There were stunning photographs of a sun-drenched terrace, a small garden filled with lemon trees, and a view of the Atlantic Ocean that seemed to stretch on forever. And then I saw the deed of ownership. It was for a property in the Algarve region of Portugal, and it was in both of our names. Charles and Eleanor Dubois. I stared at the papers, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. A house in Portugal. A place we had only ever talked about, in whispers, a distant, impossible dream we would mention on cold winter nights. A place to escape to one day. I had always assumed it was just a fantasy, something to keep us warm. But Eleanor, my practical brilliant, Eleanor had made it real. She had taken our shared dream and in secret had given it a foundation, a roof, and an address. She had built our escape hatch, our paradise, without me ever knowing. Maya gasped beside me, her eyes as wide as saucers. "Grandpa," she whispered. "What is this?" "This," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is your grandmother's masterpiece." And then I saw it. At the very bottom of the box, lying alone on the blue velvet, was a single sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in her familiar, elegant script. My hands were shaking so much now that I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the single sheet of stationery inside. It was a letter. Her last gift to me. It read, "My dearest Charles, if you are reading this, then I am gone and our quiet life together has come to an end. Do not mourn for what we have lost, my love. Smile for what we had. 50 years. We built a good life, you and I. We built a family, and we built a home. But I always knew that a home is more than just walls. It is a place of safety and dignity. I knew with a certainty that sometimes broke my heart that our children might one day forget that. They love us. I know it, but they see the world through a different lens. They see assets, not memories. That is why I built this ark for us, my love. This box contains our freedom. The house on Sparrow Hill is yours, free and clear. It is your fortress. Never let them take it from you. The money is your security. It is your independence. Never let them make you feel like a burden. And the villa. Oh, the villa is your future, Charles. It is our dream made real. I had hoped we would see it together, that we would grow old watching the sun set over the ocean. But life had a different plan. So now you must go for both of us. Go to our house by the sea. Learn to make lists again. Plant a new garden. Walk on the beach. Do not let the end of our story be the end of yours. Your life is not over. It is just beginning a new chapter. Live the rest of it for you, Charles. Go to Portugal. Be happy. All my love forever, Eleanor." I finished reading, and the tears I had held back for weeks finally came, not tears of sorrow, but tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. This box was not just a collection of papers. It was Eleanor's final act of defiance against the world's expectations. It was her final perfect expression of love. It was her voice reaching out from beyond the grave, telling me that I was not alone, that I was not finished. This was my weapon. This was my shield. This was my permission to live. The phone call was the most difficult I have ever had to make, but I knew it was necessary. I invited Andre and Simone over for dinner the following Tuesday. My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged within me for weeks. "I've been thinking about your offer," I told them, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I think it's time we made a final decision as a family." On the other end of the line, I could almost hear the triumphant smiles spreading across their faces. They agreed immediately, their voices dripping with a false sweetness that no longer had the power to fool me. When Tuesday arrived, I was ready. Maya had come over that afternoon not as a soldier for a coming battle, but as a quiet, supportive presence. She helped me set the table, a simple act that felt profound. We were preparing the stage for the final act of a long and painful play. When the doorbell rang, I was not the same man who had answered it just a few days ago. The grief was still there, a permanent resident in the house of my heart, but the fear was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable resolve. They arrived together, a united front. Andre was carrying a sleek leather briefcase, and Simone had a folder tucked under her arm. They were not coming for a family dinner. They were coming to close a deal. Their eyes swept the living room, a subtle proprietary glance as if they were already measuring for new furniture. Then they saw Maya sitting quietly in Eleanor's armchair by the fireplace, and their smiles tightened just a fraction. Her presence was not part of their plan. "Maya, honey." "What a surprise," Simone said, her voice a little too bright. "I was just keeping Grandpa company." Maya replied, her voice soft but firm. We sat down at the dining table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, and argued over politics. Tonight, it felt like a negotiating table. Andre placed his briefcase on the floor beside him with a confident thud. He and Simone looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to announce my surrender. I did not speak. Instead, I stood up, walked to the sideboard, and retrieved Eleanor's mahogany box. I placed it in the center of the table with a soft, definitive click. The air grew thick with a sudden tension. "Before we discuss your offer," I began, my voice even and calm, "I think you should see something. Your mother left a few things in order." Andre and Simone exchanged a look, a mixture of curiosity and impatience. I opened the box. First, I took out the deed to the house along with the official bank documents. I slid them across the polished wood of the table toward Andre. "This is the deed to the house on Sparrow Hill," I said. "As you can see, it is fully paid for. There is no debt. There is no financial strain." Andre picked it up, his eyes scanning the document. "Okay," he said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "So it's paid off. That's good. That just means a bigger profit for you when we sell." He was already moving on, dismissing the revelation as a minor detail. Next, I took out the thick stack of financial statements, the record of Eleanor's secret portfolio. I slid them over to Simone. "And this," I said, "is the answer to your concerns about my financial well-being." Simone's perfectly manicured fingers picked up the top page. Her eyes, which had been filled with condescending pity just moments before, now widened in disbelief. She quickly flipped through the pages, her mouth falling slightly open. I saw the calculations happening behind her eyes, the swift and brutal demolition of the story she had told herself about her poor, struggling father. She looked up at me, her face pale. She was speechless. Finally, I reached into the box one last time. I took out the oilcloth pouch containing the documents for the villa in Portugal. I did not slide these across the table. I simply laid them out in front of me, the architectural drawings, the sun-drenched photographs of the terrace, and the deed with my name and Eleanor's on it. "And this," I said, my voice quiet but ringing with a finality that silenced the entire room, "is my future." I let them look. I let the truth of the photographs and the foreign words on the deed sink in. I watched as the last vestiges of their confidence crumbled into dust. They stared at the evidence of a life my wife and I had built in secret, a life that had nothing to do with them, a dream they had never even been aware of. In that moment, they were not my powerful, successful children. They were just two greedy, foolish people who had profoundly underestimated their parents. The reckoning had arrived not with shouting or accusations, but in the quiet, undeniable truth laid bare on a dining room table. The silence that fell over the dining room was heavier than any I had ever known. It was the sound of a lifetime of assumptions turning to dust. Andre stared at the photograph of the sunlit villa in Portugal, his face a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, my son, the deal-maker, the man who always had an answer, was utterly speechless. Simone was crying, but they were not the performative tears I was used to. They were quiet, ugly tears of shame. She hid her face in her hands, unwilling to meet my gaze. The confident, entitled children who had walked through my door an hour ago had vanished, replaced by two strangers who seemed to see their own reflections for the first time and were horrified by what they saw. I felt no triumph, no desire to gloat. Seeing them so thoroughly broken brought me only a profound sense of sadness. I had won the battle, but in a way we had all lost the war. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. "The house is not for sale," I said, my voice calm and clear in the quiet room. "It will never be for sale. This is my home. It was your mother's home. And that is the end of the discussion." I paused, letting the words settle. "I am your father, and I will always love you. But love is not a transaction. It is not an inheritance to be claimed. It is a relationship. And it must be built on a foundation of respect and truth. The foundation we had is clearly broken. If we are ever going to build a new one, that is where we must begin." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet truth of my words was more powerful than any angry accusation. I did not tell them what to do next. The choice was theirs. To walk away forever or to begin the long, difficult work of earning back my trust. Without another word, they gathered their things. Andre picked up his leather briefcase, which now seemed to look cheap and foolish. They walked to the door, and for a moment, Simone turned back, her face streaked with tears, as if she wanted to say something. But she couldn't find the words. And then they were gone. The door clicked shut, leaving Maya and me in the quiet house. She came over and put her arms around me, and I leaned into her embrace, the embrace of the family I had left. The final scene of my old life was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one. 3 months later, I was standing on a sun-drenched terrace, the warm Portuguese breeze on my face and the vast blue Atlantic Ocean spread out before me like a promise. The villa was even more beautiful than in the photographs. It was small, peaceful, and filled with light. Eleanor had chosen well. I was not alone. Maya had taken a semester off from college to be with me, to help me settle in, to help me build this new life. In the small garden under the shade of a lemon tree, we had started to plant a new garden. I knelt in the rich, dark soil, showing her how to gently loosen the roots of a young rosemary plant, the same way Eleanor had shown me all those years ago. She looked at me, her hands covered in dirt. Her face lit with a smile that was so much like her grandmother's. It made my heart ache in the best possible way. "It smells like home," she said. I looked at her, my granddaughter, my unexpected ally. I looked at the small, sturdy plant in her hands. I looked out at the endless ocean. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of profound peace. The past was not a ghost to be feared, but a foundation to be built upon. And the future was not a question mark, but an open, sunlit path. I was finally home. A house is built with wood and stone, but a home is built with respect and truth. You cannot inherit a home by force. You can only be invited into it. The heaviest chains are not made of iron, but of the assumptions we place upon those we claim to love.